Perfect. So, unfortunately, I'm sitting in Vattenfall's headquarter office, at least today. Of course, due to COVID-19 breakout, we are more or less now being placed from our home offices, so to say, and at least still in Stockholm, in Sweden, we are at least allowed to be in our head office as long as no one is actually feeling ill. So I'm one of the few left here, and hopefully we will have few of us being able to or not being able to work the next coming weeks. So my part of this SAMS Nordic this year is really to go a bit deeper into what I was talking about last year as a moderator, about what is actually the challenge when we work with software license hybrid contracts. So a bit about that. And let's see now if we can move to the next slide here. By some reason it's not, oh, here we go. So effectively when we work with our software license agreements and the models we want to have, we end up very, very often in a situation that we have a contract that was signed eventually years and years ago, which was a traditional software license agreement, and at the end of the contract we realize that this is not really applicable anymore because we want to do the licensing in a completely different way. We want to have these software solutions delivered partly as SaaS solutions or managed services as well as on-premise. So we end really up in a hybrid contractual situation. And really the challenge we have from IT procurement is to from the beginning now make sure that our agreements are set up with our suppliers in a way that will allow us to continue to mend and to live with such contracts we have started with. So what we will explore a bit is a bit of the best practices we use, at least here in Vattenfall IT procurement with our IT managers, and what stakeholders are important when we have the process about making these agreements successful, and eventually some success stories if there actually is any. That's really the taking point of this. You are welcome to put questions up whenever you want, but there will be also Q&A after my presentation. So when we look at the negotiation, because of course that's the most important, to negotiate and end up with agreements that are actually useful for our stakeholders. As a procurement officer, I'm not really interested in just doing my powerful negotiations and then I actually hand over a license agreement or IT services agreement to my stakeholders that they cannot really use. That's waste of my time and waste of the supplier's time. So we have to look into what kind of tendering process do we actually have here. As Vattenfall is a state-owned company, a utility company, we have both areas within Vattenfall where we are actually enforced and regulated to have what we call public tenders, the LUF in Sweden and EU tenders in some of the other countries. So that is, of course, a challenge to be able to tender in such a way that we will end up with these kind of flexible agreements for the future. Then we, of course, have direct competition for some areas where we can directly go out, either with a few suppliers or a bigger tender. We can even, in some cases, have a direct award. If we see that this specific solution, this specific setup is nothing, we can really go out and tender. So we have different ways of doing this, but depending on what tender we do, we need to think of what the consequences will be in the contractual situation for termination of contracts and for renegotiation. So the terms here need to be already decided and thought of when we actually sign up the contracts, the agreement from the very first moment. How will we be able to renegotiate the agreement? Meaning that if we want to have a hybrid situation later on, how do we already now cover that? What is the situation for market comparisons? Can we actually put that into the contract that we are allowed to do what we would say market benchmark comparison to see are there actually different solutions, are there competitors out in the market within the period of the agreement? If we had a public tender, for example, we may not be allowed to do that. If we have an open direct competition tender, then maybe it's easier. But if we didn't add that to the negotiation terms and to the contract, we may not be actually allowed to do it anyway. Then, of course, can we retender, or are we ending up in a situation where this contract is ending full stop and we have to do complete new tender? That's also something to think of in the beginning, considering now that we are changing models within the IT landscape. So these three things are really things that are becoming more important in our termination of contract terms, that they are there from the very beginning. And what I have seen now the last 3-4 years, when we can see more and more hybrid situations, is that that's nothing we want to talk about from the beginning, because we want to have this agreement, we are negotiating it, and it should be very clear that termination is based on certain time period with maybe options to prolong, maybe options to add some things, and not really the other part. So this is becoming more, it's becoming more important, and we can look into, I would say, the telecoms industry marketplace, where this has been much more evident and been used for years, not really in the software IT landscape. The terms of amendments of the service contract becomes also extremely important here, because we need to be able to, within the contract, change. We may have a traditional on-prem license, and we want to suddenly move out some part of it to SaaS content or to a managed service or third party to actually take care of that specific application. So from a software license management aspect, it becomes quite complex and challenging. How are these licenses going to be used for different application contexts? So that's something that needs to be added into the contracts from the beginning as well, that we can amend on the application level, on the software license level, in order to change the models. And also market competition. What does it actually mean for us by the end of maybe the basic term, 3 years or 4 years or 5 years with that supplier? Are there actually different support and maintenance services we can source in, or we can challenge to this contract? So these are things also we're looking into much more deeper now. It's not only about traditional support and maintenance. It's not about traditional, we can support your product as it's implemented right now. We can maintain the software code. It's new kind of services that need to be added directly from the beginning, or at least the option for it. And the last one, which we actually feel the most challenging one, is integration. I mean, a lot of our new IT software systems we are implementing have to be integrated with different SAP models. I mean, SAP for us is, of course, one of these big ones we cannot really bail out of. So we need to integration with other IT systems is a part of the contract. We may have to have the supplier to agree and accept that they need to work with other IT systems than the first one they integrate to. If we go further, then, if we do this process for renegotiation, setting up these contracts, I don't see there is anything new about this compared with the way we've been working before. It's not only about IT and about the central IT and about procurement. The business areas, as Victoria said very well in her presentation, the stakeholders, the business areas are really the ones driving us now. It's not longer so much about what we want to do as a common IT landscape. We need to really look into how different business areas can actually work with these applications and with these different setups. One area may not be allowed to have a SaaS. But other areas in Vattenfall can well work with SaaS, no problem. They may even be that an area that had an on-prem solutions for years now is choosing to go for more managed service contract. So the flexibility in the agreements have to be there, and the SAM department need to be able to cope with that. Because if our software asset managers cannot actually keep control of all these different license models, then we are really in trouble. We also have, for some of these, we have different contract managers. They could be sitting in the IT department, they could be sitting out in the business, and they are, of course, only responsible for the parts of their own businesses. However, how do you actually set up a contract that is flexible enough to make sure that everyone can use it? I mean, you may want to have a general framework agreement, you want to have an enterprise and corporate group agreement, but with complete different setups. So we need to have the contract managers to really buy into this and give us input into how do they want to work with this in the future. For me, as IT procurement, my legal colleague is the most important in any case of anything we do when we start to look into these different hybrid models. How will that hit us legally? How will the liquidated damages look like for different solutions? Limitations in penalties, SLAs. Legal have to look into that and really be actively part of it. So it's becoming more and more business legal. As well as security, which in our case, we have both security officers out in the businesses, within the central IT organization, and in the legal office. So these security officers, of course, need to also tell us what are the security regulations in their area, what are the requirements they have on this specific setup. I did actually put procurement here. I mean, of course, procurement is there, I'm there. However, what I see now also is happening is that we have procurement that is not IT procurement also taking stake in this. It could be old direct procurement people. They used to buy effectively these solutions as a part of the direct procurement part, not as software license agreements, not as IT agreements. They were just buying it as a part of a product. A very good case, which is not a case I'm working with, but if you look at robotics, they were sold as really robots into production areas. And now you can actually have two parts of it. One is the software applications for how we're going to use the robots, and the other one is the hardware, the traditional. So when does it become a complete software-based IT contract and stop being a direct procurement one? So we are trying to now get people out there in the real operations procurement to also be part of this. So a lot of parties. This last point I have is probably the most challenging for me. I really try to come up with a success story. And frankly, based on what we've done, I mean, we may have 5, 6 of the big contracts where we have all these aspects of traditional software license models, on-premise implementation, which is easy for us then, of course, to manage. We have what I say, XaaS, not only SaaS, it could also be different types of service applications or pure managed services with third parties, and it could be actually several parties involved. So the combination of those business models into contract is that what we try to do, which is actually working out quite well with a few cases for the moment, is that we really start with a general framework agreement with the supplier, and then we will build complete different sub-agreements. Still, of course, several sub-agreements make life quite complicated, both for the contract manager and for myself in procurement, because I have to look into if I want to change from one model to another one, can I actually reuse another sub contract, or do I still have to do complete new? But at least it allows us in the company to amend and to add more new ways of buying software and handle the software and applications. Then I would say there are a few suppliers that can handle it, not many in the market. Everyone is claiming to be able to do it. And in some ways, like really learning by error, learning by trying to all the time continue and develop the contracts. But it also takes a lot more time for our IT organization to really get more into the details of the contractual terms. The 3 last ones I did put in here in this slide is really when a SaaS provider, a lot of new companies, we have all these startups, they almost everyone wants to buy SaaS. They want to provide us SaaS services. They are not interested in selling licenses for on-prem. And they go from SaaS to really managed service provider. And what does that mean for us? Where is the difference between a SaaS and a managed service provider? Very blurry for the moment. Terms are not really set up, and we really need to go into every single case to see how one or the other will actually impact our business and the license model we have. Also, the traditional ones, of course, suddenly they go SaaS. They say, okay, now we want to sell our products as SaaS services. We can see that clearly in the business area of IT provisioning, where SaaS is really good because I can control all the data my customers are going to have, and which means I can sell more services. However, there may be a customer that don't want to have a SaaS due to regulation or due to really the danger of having the data somewhere else, and the opposite. So what I can see is happening, we have the traditional sourcing, which means procurement of software licenses, very simple, even though we have a jungle out there of license models. Then suddenly, after a while, we just decide, now we don't want to have it in-house. We don't want to have it on-prem. Please take it over. Can you run it for us? Outsourcing of the services. So now we have a complete different contract. So we may have to completely renegotiate this agreement. And then after a while, we decide insource again. It didn't work out. We were not happy with this outsource. And the application did not work the way we wanted. We cannot control new features, upgrades. We want to have it again. And we end up in this hybrid environment, really, where we are sitting eventually with part of the company using the on-prem model. Some have outsourced, and some are insourcing. So this is really where the world is going right now. We don't really have any standard agreements for that, which means we need to every time now tailor and try to think outside the traditional box. So that's the reality and where we are right now with IT procurement really in Vattenfall. So I didn't think of having more details about this area, and I would really want to invite you all to put questions and have a bit of debate about this. What do you think about working this way, or how do you work?
Well, thank you very much, Karin. Simon is in charge with the questions we received from the audience. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, the first question we have is, what is the reason for having IT security and legal in the renegotiation process?
Yeah, that's that's a good question. It is mainly because of the fact that we changed completely the terms, we changed completely the way we work with the suppliers, and it can have legal impacts. It could make life when it comes to data security, GDPR, IT security, even the company's security, to be completely different. So really these days we need to have these stakeholders part of, it's not only commercial negotiations anymore. When we do a renegotiation, we need to think about both legal and the security part.
Okay, I see. And how many years have you had such agreement and relations with hybrid license models?
The first one we did was 2000, at least in Vattenfall, was 2015, which was from a traditional GIS application on premise to an outsourcing for one of the units in the company that wanted to have a full SaaS, full-blown SaaS with the same supplier. So that was the first time we had to go from a traditional just buy license, buy data, to actually move to a hybrid solution. Now 4 or 5 years along the line with that supplier, we are developing the part of these services for more agent services, where actually the supplier is also handling third-party licenses for us, even though we will actually use them on premise and use them as SaaS for different stakeholders. And also we can see that some parties are insourcing the SaaS. They believe that they can do it better themselves. At the same time, a third party, we're talking now internally in Vattenfall, now is considering to go SaaS with the same supplier. So that's one where we really have a hybrid contractual situation from the very beginning. That's probably the oldest one. Now, I mean, if you look at the big ones like Microsoft and some of the other ones, this is becoming reality as well, where we can have those managed services like Azure clouds, both on-prem and outside of the company. We also buy new applications where we work with R&D, both on-prem and outside. So it's becoming more and more reality to have that. But I would say 2015 was probably the first one, and now it's just growing.
Okay, thank you for this very in-depth answer. The next question is, if there is one tip you could give by renewing the Azure monetary commitment, what is your most important piece of advice?
Could you put the questions up again? That last one?
Yeah, it's about Azure monetary commitment, and if there's a tip you could provide, what is the most important piece of advice for this monetary commitment in Azure?
Oh, that's a bad one. It's, I mean, it depends completely how your company structure is set up. We have, as I said, we have different setups. I mean, we need to do it both on-prem due to regulation and security. I mean, effectively, we cannot use the cloud services and the models that are easy user-based for the cloud ones, but I would keep it in such a way that we have an open setup on the monetary part, where we really have a volume-based model that can be reviewed every year. So you can look into, depending on how the application has been used, how we've been able to use these different services, that the monetary commitments will be reviewed based on really the business owner's use of it. Is it actually applicable to use this model? Yes. Okay, let's continue work on it. Is it not applicable after a year? Let's revise it with the supplier. So that's a way of thinking. If you go in again to the telecom services industry, that's really where that has been more and more mature for many, many years, that you make sure that you have the review opportunity to look into the monetary commitment part. And the company we never actually guarantee any monetary commitment. So for us, we really try to stay out of that. It could be certain projects where we have to do something, but try to make sure you have a benchmark and you have a review window with the supplier.
Okay, I hope
that
this
will be my tip.
answers the question for the one who asked it. The last question will be, in this hybrid environment, how do you stay flexible at Vattenfall?
It's not a question about how we stay flexible. We have to be flexible, and we have to be more and more flexible, which of course is a complexity. The saying "keep it simple" is really nice to say. However, keep it simple also will limit you. I think that's the takeaway I have in the work I do, is that it's easy to say keep it simple, but in that sense you may end up in a situation where you will have to go out and tender again because you don't have the flexibility. Having flexibility means we need to understand the complexity of the environment. I mean, we talk integration to our systems. Will that change in the future or not? Probably it will. And also keep more of that kind of agile and review window set up in contracts. So maybe a shorter basic contract with a lot of more flexible optional amendments and prolongations. Just understanding that IT is becoming more and more what we live for and what we need to have in every aspect of the company. I mean, everywhere where we have no IT competence, IT is just coming as a big, big wave, really. So keep it flexible with the terms. Make sure that you can renew, that you can amend, that you can change the content of services. So don't really try to force these specific terms you were thinking of right now. Think a bit longer. What will happen in 4 years, 5 years?
Okay.
Does it answer?
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you very much for your answers. I will hand it back to Claudio. He will also continue with the program now.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karin. That was a great presentation. I think altogether we had an amazing morning with some good, insightful and provoking presentations.